simply this: is the Quran, am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for an Englishman, it's Quran, but you can
Quran.
say Quran. I say Quran all the time. That's how I
Quran.
say it.
I'm
Yeah.
trying. Is the Quran preserved in the theological sense, dot for dot? Because I know the first question, if I ask, is it preserved, is, well, what do you mean by
Right,
preserved?
right,
And
right,
so I'm asking in the traditional fundamentalist sense, where people are out there acting like everything is inerrant, infallible, dot for dot from the
right, right.
original. Is that the case?
Yeah. So I mean, it's exactly as you said. Like, how do you define preservation, right? And that's really a question that's not always that easy to answer, and you jump right in with a difficult question. So let's try. Um, so when we're talking about the Quranic text, it is known. It is a very, very stable text. It has actually changed very, very little from
Right.
its canonization around 650, and I'm pretty firmly believe that the Quran was standardized, as the tradition tells us, by Uthman. He had a standard text created, sent it out to different parts of the world and of the Islamic world, of course, at the time. And after that, the text basically hasn't changed. That's true. What has changed? So essentially, so he has 4 copies made of the text, and those differ a little bit from one another. And those differences are probably just a result of scribal mistakes. The differences that are there are really tiny. One says and he said, and the other one, a verse that starts with he said, and is missing. Well, that's not another theologically very important thing. So why would you put that in there on purpose? Now, so that's one thing you get. You get, a text that is somewhat different in these different regions, very tiny. I mean, it's a very, very small number. So when we're talking about it, we're talking about 40 differences, maybe a tiny bit more. And those are the differences between the texts. And after that, the text has been copied meticulously, and even those your first 4 copies are very meticulously copied. And basically, the text as we have it today is more or less the same as the way that Rahman has standardized it. More or less, I say. There's some spelling differences. Some words change spelling over time, but they change spelling over time. It's just small spelling differences. But in terms of words, it's word for word identical to Uthman's text. Right.
Let's take off theological glasses and just look at this as a historian, the same way I would maybe ask you to look at let's say a 2nd century document or something biblically, right? You will approach that. I want you to not care what Christians think, so to speak, and say, okay, maybe it's not what fundamentalist Christians down in Florida who are in a, fundamentalist, literalist church. Yeah, it's not that kind of preserved, but it is very preserved, and you can give your explanation. Would that be fair to say that historians who are approaching this without kind of the traditional lens are going to say, well, we have good reason to say this is far better preserved than what we see in biblical studies, but yet it may not be perfectly preserved, identical dot for dot?
Yeah, so there's an interesting. So yes, it was incredibly well preserved. So yes, it was incredibly well preserved. And depending on what you call perfect, is kind of what it comes down to. So let's put it like this. What I just told you, basically, all these things that I just told you about the text, these are all things that Islamic tradition knows and says is true, right? They are aware that there are differences between the codices because they recorded them themselves. We have medieval literature that says, the Mus'haf, so that's the name for the codex of the Quran, in Kufa has this variant, and the one in Basra has this variant instead. And to them that apparently was not an issue for believing that the text was preserved. If you're like, well, that's not what preserved means to me, I mean, that's fine, but that's clearly, how they understood the text. They understood the text to have differences. They understood the text to be recited in different ways, and that did not get in the way of them thinking the text is preserved. And so maybe that perfectly is I don't know. I think it's a bit of almost a red herring. Are they really talking about perfectly? And where's the perfection in this, right? And I think people get a little distracted by this.
Perfectly preserved.
Perfectly preserved Quran.
People get a little distracted by this, also through the polemics that go around about this. But it's of course absolutely absurd to see these kind of polemics between, say, Christian fundamentalists and Muslims, where the Christians are saying, "Look, your book isn't preserved." It's like, well, sure,
Good point.
but you literally do not have anything, like the first 200 years, and then you have like a credit card size thing. It's like, well, the Quran is complete. We have really a complete Quran, basically, in fragments, right, of different manuscripts, multiple times attested within the first century. That is just not something you can say about the Bible at all. And it's, front to back. And, there are some bits that we don't have multiple attestations of, but we basically have the full text in the first century.
In first century, he's talking about the first century of Muhammad's life. So no, I just want to clarify for our audience. He's probably
Islamic calendar starts at the migration of Muhammad to Medina,
right?
Which is about 10 years before his death. So that puts it somewhere for you.
I just want to get people used to that on my channel, because they're going to hear more academics from Islam. They're going to say first century, second century.
Certainly, when I'm talking first, second, third century, that's first, second, third century Hijri, and I'll certainly be doing that. I try to recalculate, but I'm bad at it.
It's okay. No. I appreciate that, and I respect that. And yes, I think that that's hypocritical of Christians to run around and want to try and do that, and then not even no. We have preservation, and P52 is the earliest, like you said, credit card, not even credit card, like smaller size fragment, and that's what you're hinging on.
But in terms of words, it's word for word identical to Uthman's text.
Entire chapters of the Quran being lost forever, large passages being lost forever, verses being eaten by a sheep, lost
Compilation
forever.
of the Quran as it began with Abu Bakr. He said to Zayd, search for fragmentary scripts of the Quran and collect it in one book. This was very difficult.
There is no historical tradition, from pre-modern times that is as meticulous about this kind of stuff as the Islamic tradition is. Islamic tradition goes to extreme lengths to figure out, okay, is this person trustworthy? Is this train of transmission? Does it make sense? Is it plausible that these two people would have met each other? Do we have reasons to think that this guy is a liar? Right. And they go through all the details, and we have big books, tomes that are collecting these kinds of things. And of course, hadith, so sayings of the Prophet, are graded, right? They say, this one is good, this one is bad, this one is unreliable, and that's very important.
So what Uthman did was he made sure that the one text which was agreed upon by the companions of the Prophet, the people who lived and walked with him and heard from him directly and knew the contents of the Quran, once that was prepared and approved upon, he ordered that the others should be burned, because they may contain mistakes, they may contain variant readings, and rather than confuse the public, give them the one pure word of God and promote that one. Now what's wrong with that? If Christians had a text which is approved by the disciples of Jesus, they would defend that with their very lives, and I wouldn't blame them. But we do not have such a text, folks.